Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham Ruach Kodesh. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Isaiah, the 29th chapter. Jerusalem is warned. And basically it goes into, some more judgment that's pronounced against, against Isaiah, not against Isaiah, but by Isaiah against Israel. All right, here, as you can see, Jerusalem. And then it also deals with aspects of peace, right, that the Lord is going to bring ultimately in the end. So this is Isaiah chapter 29, verse 1. Woe to Ariel, the city where David dwelt. Now, Ariel, when you go into the Hebrew, is I believe is Ariala, or Ariala, which means Lion of God, right? Ariala, right, Lion of God. And as you can see here, right, a name applied to Jerusalem, because back in ancient Israel, there wasn't an actual city named Ariel, right, per se. This is more like a symbolic name for Jerusalem. Okay, so as Isaiah is pronouncing warning, right, woe unto them, add ye year to year, let them kill sacrifices. So in other words, yeah, go on, right, and kill your sacrifices and have your feast days year to year. Yet I would distress Ariel, right? The Lord is still going to bring distress or judgment upon them, because they weren't exempt. They were also doing wickedness over there in Jerusalem. And there shall be heaviness and sorrow, and it shall be unto me as Ariel, right? So basically, as their name signifieth. Now some people try to, when you look at some of these other translations and commentaries, they try to link this with Ezekiel. I believe is 40 something, one of those verses in there, maybe 15 or so, which they claim is the same Hebrew word here. I checked that, I didn't really see that. But in any case, as the Lord is saying here, right, you're going to be unto me as this symbolic name signifieth, right, which here is in the terms of a lion, you can imagine the Lord basically treating you like you're a wild lion, right? In this case, that would be to take your ass out. So verse 3, it says, and I will camp against thee round about, and will lay siege against thee with a mount, and I will raise forts against thee. All right, and that the forts are like siege ramps. And the Lord is going to do this by an adversarial nation, right? So basically, Isaiah is prophesying here that when the Lord brings an enemy against you, which in future time to Jerusalem, that was going to be the Babylonians, but basically that would be his doing. That's why he says, I would do it. Verse 4, and thou shalt be brought down, and shall speak out of the ground, and thy speech shall be low out of the dust, and thy voice shall be as of one that hath a familiar spirit out of the ground, and thy speech shall whisper out of the dust. And what this is signifying is basically Jerusalem being taken from a high, state to being brought very, very, very low. So low, it's likened onto basically a dead person speaking, right? Or a ghost, right? A spirit of a ghost speaking, right? From the grave, right? And so that's the reference that Isaiah makes here. That's why he mentioned out of the ground, right? Which is where the grave is. And thy speech shall be low out of the dust. This is just a extreme emphasis on the Lord bringing Jerusalem to a very, very low state, which we ended up seeing happen to them, right? And as it mentions, thy speech shall be low out of the dust, and thy voice shall be as of one that hath a familiar spirit out of the ground. So basically, like a necromancer or somebody that practices or deals with familiar spirits, which are demons, to conjure up, or using them as a means to conjure up the spirit of the dead, okay, as it mentions, out of the ground. And thy speech shall whisper out of the dust. When you go into that word whisper, one of the definitions there is a ghost, okay? So what I'll do here is, to make it a bit clearer, Take a look at the NLT. It says, then deep from the earth you will speak. From low in the dust your words will come. Your voice will whisper from the ground like a ghost conjured up from the grave. So that's basically to signify like being in this very, very, low condition. Verse 5, moreover, the multitude of thy strangers shall be made like small dust. So judgment is pronounced against Israel. Jerusalem is going to be brought to this low state. Basically, they're going to be judged for their wickedness. And then it shifts here to basically what the Lord is going to do to the adversaries of Israel. So moreover, the multitude of thy strangers, when you go into the word strangers here, it actually goes into, as it says, the war. One of the definitions here is strange, another, stranger, foreigner, an enemy, right? Loathsome. So in this context, as we read the remaining of the verse, this would apply to the actual other nations that will come against or have come against Israel. Right? They shall be made like small dust. They shall be like small dust, and the multitude of the terrible ones, which is still referring to these strangers, shall be as chaff that passeth away, which the chaff is the remains on the threshing floor after the crops are threshed. Yea, it shall be at an instant suddenly. So this is describing what the fate of these nations that have come against Israel is going to be. Thou shalt be visited of the Lord, then switches back to judgment from the Lord. Thou shalt be visited of the Lord of hosts with thunder and with earthquake and with great noise, with storm and tempest and the flame of devouring fire. Right? And these are basically the judgments of the Lord. And each one of these is basically dangerous in itself, right? That can cause mass destruction. So Isaiah pretty much jumps between what's going to happen to these other nations, what the Lord is going to do to Israel. And then as we keep on reading, he'll jump onto, but at a certain point, the Lord is going to make it better for Israel again, and then so on and so forth. Verse 7, and the multitude of the nations that fight against Ariel, Jerusalem, even all that fight against her and her munition, her fortress, and that distress her, shall be as a dream of a night vision. And this verbiage is similar in, I believe, Zechariah 14. It mentions all those that have fought against Jerusalem, the judgment, the plague that's going to come against them. So the Lord, via Isaiah, is saying here, there's going to come a time, right, which this will really be fulfilled in the kingdom once we're delivered, when, Lord willing, we're of that number, when these nations are no longer going to have dominion over us. And in fact, it's going to be a refreshing feeling. It's going to feel like waking up from a dream, right, where it felt very real, but you wake up and it's like it never happened. That's what it'll be like in the kingdom, right? We'll be in such a good state that it'll feel almost like the things we suffered here didn't really happen. They were just like a bad dream. That's why it mentions that they shall be as a dream of the night vision. It shall even be as when an hungry man dreameth, and behold, he eateth, but he awaketh, and his soul is empty. So imagine you fast asleep and you're dreaming about like devouring at this big back all you can eat buffet, the Morbid Obese Black Center. I'm just joking, but you're having a good time, stuff in your face, but then you wake up and you weren't really eating, right? Now you're actually hungry. Or as when a thirsty man dreameth, and behold, he drinketh, right? So you're having a dream and you're either like really, really thirsty, you're like in a desert somewhere and you finally came across water and you're just drinking. And then you wake up, right? But he awaketh, and behold, he is faint, and his soul hath appetite, right? So you wake up and then you're like, oh, shoot, that was a dream. And now you're actually thirsty because what happened in the dream was just a dream, right? It didn't really affect you how you thought it was. So in like manner, right, so shall the multitude of all the nations be that fight against Mount Zion. So that's how it's going to be like, when the Edomites, the Elamites, the Hamites, all of the nations, the Ishmaelites that came against us and troubled us and fought against us. In the kingdom, it's going to be like just a dream. Verse 9. Stay yourselves and wonder, cry ye out and cry. They are drunken, but not with wine. They stagger, but not with strong drink. Right? And so that the reason that they're drunken, but not with wine is basically what Isaiah is saying is that they're drunken, like we went into in the previous chapter. They're drunken, but with ungodly ways, right? Or different philosophies or doctrines that are leading them astray or that are causing them to go in the wrong way. So that's being likened unto them being drunken, right? But obviously not with wine, and them staggering. Okay, so in their sense of judgment, right, in their actions, in the way that they're conducting life, they're moving like one who staggers, right, when they're walking like an actual drunk person, but they're not actually intoxicated with strong drink. And this is because they went astray from the ways of Yahweh Ba'asham Yahushai. For the Lord Yahweh hath poured out upon you the spirit of deep sleep, and hath closed your eyes. So now the spirit of deep sleep, it doesn't mean, right, that instantly Isaiah turns around and everybody falls asleep, right? Everybody's just knocked out mid third dream. The spirit of deep sleep is a spirit of deep sleep. Okay, so what that means is that they've been blinded, right? That's why he mentioned that, and have closed your eyes. They've been blinded spiritually and prevented from seeing the truth and ultimately turning to it and repenting. And this is why they continue to err, okay, in judgment, and err in their way of life. And they wouldn't take heed to the warnings of the prophets even till this day, because there are some people that no matter how you break it down to them, no matter how you teach it to them, no matter how severely you warn them, they just won't see it. They just won't understand it, and they won't take heed to it, because the Lord has poured that spirit of deep sleep upon them. The prophets and your rulers, the seers, hath he covered. And because of that, you had a lot of false prophets, because they wouldn't be able to prophesy the truth concerning the Lord, because he had put that spirit of deep sleep and slumber upon them. Okay, so the rulers would misjudge, and the prophets or the seers, they were called seers because they would receive visions, okay, of things to come, usually by the Lord. Okay, and that would basically they would be able to forewarn the people as to what the Lord has in store for them. But now you had a lot of people that were seeing a vain vision, once again, because the Lord had poured his spirit upon them. Verse 11, and the vision of all is become unto you as the words of a book that is sealed. So in a nutshell, what Isaiah is saying here is that the Lord has blinded you, so you can't see the truth. You can't see the correct ways. And the vision of all, going into the prophecies, right, and really the understanding of it, has now become unto you like the words of a book that is sealed. So if you, let me pull up an image here, sealed book. So these for example are like seals, right? This is a seal. This is a seal. Like a seal is basically what you close the book and you seal the book, right? This is an example of one too, where they would have the covers would have like a lock, and you would need like a key or some sort to open it. So even if you knew how to read, for example, if you couldn't open the book, you couldn't basically see what was in there. So Isaiah here is likening their inability to see and understand the spiritual aspect, right, and really the truth of the matter, onto the words of a book that is sealed. Okay, as it says, which men deliver to one that is learned, saying, read this, I pray thee. And he saith, I cannot, for it is sealed. So, like the example I just gave, one that is learned, if the book was open, he could actually read it and tell you what it says. But it's sealed, so he can't even open it. And the book is delivered to him that is not learned, saying, read this, I pray thee. And he saith, I am not learned. So even if it was open, I can't tell you what it says because I am not learned. Right? And this is just an analogy to signify that regardless of who you went to, they wouldn't be able to give you the understanding because the Lord has blinded them. Verse 13, wherefore the Lord said, for as much as this people draw near to me with their mouth and with their lips do honor me, and you see that till this day, that's a characteristic of Israelites, to where they'll praise the Lord, they'll say they believe in the Lord, they'll show signs of worship, right, at least in their eyes, but when it comes down to the actual deeds that show that they they truly serve the Lord and honor him, they don't do that. All right, as it says, but have removed their heart far from me. So their actual inner thoughts on the Lord, it's not there. The Lord is not in their actual thoughts, and their fear toward me is taught by the precept of men. Okay, so basically by the traditions of men, right, by what men tell them, not what the scriptures say, but what men tell them you got to do, that's what they do. And that's how they show their fear to the Lord, by really fearing men and following men. Okay, so one example is, like a modern day example would be, so-called Christians go into a Christian church and they sing and praise and hallelujah and all of these things, and they're jumping around because they have zeal. But when outside of that place, when they're faced with something in their daily life that is a test of their faith or how much they fear the Lord, they'll succumb to it, right? Whether it be in matters of adultery or an abominable food or something that the Lord requires, that they're faced with that, they don't do it. So only in word, they'll call themselves a Christian, they'll call themselves a believer, but indeed, they don't actually show that. And then you ask them, wait, the scriptures say that you're not supposed to do X, Y, and Z, but you say that you're a believer, so why are you doing it? That's an example. They say that they are, but actually physically, they don't show it. Verse 14, therefore, behold, I will proceed to do a marvelous work among this people, even a marvelous work and a wonder. For the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the understanding of their prudent men shall be hid. Okay, and this is something that we that happened then, but really it was something that really transpired over time, right? Because if you look, and that's why the Lord called it a marvelous work, right, and a wonder. When you look at Israelites today, and you look at how we were in the past, it's no wonder that people find it difficult to believe that these are the chosen people of God, right? These are the people who were scholars. These are the people who were in high positions. These were the people that were, like, look at Daniel, who was placed in as a president, okay, in a heathen empire. Look at Joseph, right? Look at Israelites that rose to these high positions. Even when you look at when we were dwelling amongst ourselves, right, in an autonomous, kingdom, in how we governed ourselves. And when you read like the book of Ecclesiasticus, Proverbs, these wise sayings, these were written by Israelites. But today, when you look at and you hear the things they say, how they talk, what they do, you go back and you look at the women of old and how they thought in certain situations, and how the Lord even used some of them, right, to Esther, Judith, etc., etc. And then you look at the women today, it's a wonder that how did you go from that state to where you are now? And that's why the Lord said, right, for the wisdom of their wise men shall perish. So now all you hear is just madness out of their mouths, and the understanding of the prudent men shall be hid. You don't go save a certain few or remnant. People don't go and view Israelites today as scholars. When I say Israelites, I don't mean Hebrew Israelites as they deem us, right? I mean, we are Hebrew Israelites, but when people hear Hebrew Israelites, they're just thinking of the prophets, right? I mean, like today, what they will call so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. People don't go to them as like scholars. You want to go to the scholars, let's go to them. They don't. And that's a part of the wonder and marvelous work the Lord did. Marvelous, not in the sense of like oh, it's an amazing, beautiful thing, but marvelous as it's something to marvel at. Verse 15, woe unto them that seek deep to hide their counsel from the Lord Yahweh, and their works are in dark. And they say, who seeth us, and who knoweth us? Right? So basically having their works and their devices, their scheming, okay, in secret. Why is it in secret? Because a lot of it is wicked. Now, this is something that you had Israelites that were doing back then, more so the priests, the princes, those in high positions, and they were doing it in secret because it was something that, given their position, would be a disgraceful thing, right? To be like, yo, how are you involved in these kinds of things? And you're supposed to be like a ruler over the people. But similar to, I think it's in the book of Amos, the 9th chapter, if I remember correctly, about the sinful kingdom, a lot of some of these verses here now apply to Esau, Edom. Okay, in the same way that they also have their hidden counsels, as it's written in Psalms, the 64th chapter. Okay, and they do these secrets. They have these secret meetings behind doors, thinking that it's a closed door meeting. Nobody's gonna find out. Nobody's gonna be able to expose what's going on, and yet the Lord still brings it to light. Verse 16, surely your turning of things upside down shall be esteemed as the potter's clay. Right, and back then you had Israelites that would pervert, because when you go into the turning of things, when you look it up in the Hebrew, they put it together, right? The turning of things upside down. And you have here perverseness, right? To turn things upside down. So you take the right way and you twist it, right? Instead of judging righteously, you twist it for whatever selfish gain that you would get from it. And you had people doing that back then, but you also have it primarily applying to Esau today, because they're the ones in this stead, okay, of turning things upside down. But as it says, it shall be esteemed as the potter's clay, meaning, all this that you're doing, thinking that you're pulling the strings, you're really still, at the end of the day, the clay. You're not the potter. You're the clay. Okay? And as the clay, right, for shall the work say of him that made it, he made me not? Or shall the thing framed say of him that framed it, he hath no understanding? So just like you, and that's rhetorical, right? Because just like you don't, when a potter makes a vase, right, or a pot or whatever it is from clay, the clay doesn't turn back and try to boast against the potter. Okay, the clay didn't make itself that way. It didn't shape itself. It didn't frame itself. It was the potter who did it skillfully, because that's an art, to craft it in such a way that it takes shape like that, and then to fully go forth with the process of hardening it into where it becomes really solid. That takes a form of understanding and a form of wisdom. So these questions here are rhetorical, like being the just like a clay, right, doesn't basically boast itself against the potter. You are that position of the clay. Okay, so you shouldn't be trying to come against your maker or boast yourself against your maker or think that you can outsmart or hide from the Most High. Verse 17, is it not yet a very little while? And so now you see that the separation here, right? Blessing after discipline. So after the judgments and stuff have been mentioned, now it goes into the focus shifts more now into really a relief, right? A blessing here, as it says. Is it not yet a very little while, and Lebanon shall be turned into a fruitful field, and the fruitful field shall be esteemed as a forest, right? So that is a representation of plentifulness, right? Abundance. And the reason it says Lebanon shall be turned into a fruitful field is because it's known for having trees and cedars and so on and so forth. But after the judgments and the calamities that would come to that region, it would need to be restored back to a fruitful state. Okay, and then as Isaiah mentions here, it would even be made more abundant, right, and more, and basically become more so like a forest, right, full of resources. And this is something that's going to happen that very little while we're still in that. Okay, but eventually that very little while, that time is going to be up, and that's going to come by manifestation of Yahushua coming back, delivering his elect, and then the earth being renewed again. Okay, which will lead to all this these perks and this fruitfulness. Verse 18, and in that day shall the deaf, right, that day, once again, it's just talking about a future time, shall the deaf hear the words of the book, and the eyes of the blind shall see out of obscurity and out of darkness, which is obscurity and darkness. When you go into the word obscurity, let's click that real quick. It says here, right, darkness, gloom, spiritual unreceptivity. So what time is that going to be? Because guess what? Up until the time of destruction, because this is primarily the deaf here and the blind here are primarily starting with Israel. Okay, so up until the time of the destruction, they're still going to be deaf. They're still going to be blind, right? In the sense that the Lord isn't going to lift that off of them so that they can repent and get delivered. So the time when the deaf are now going to hear the words of the book, right? Basically to see it clearly, to have their eyes open, and understand the things that we have been trying to tell them. That's going to be in the kingdom, right? When they come back, and the scriptures say that all shall know the Lord, right? We're not going to need to teach our neighbor about the Lord because they're all going to know the Lord. That's going to be when the deaf, which is not them being literally deaf, but being spiritually deaf, are going to understand. Okay, just like we understand now, and will understand more when the Lord makes us whole. And the eyes of the blind shall see out of that darkness, because right now they're in darkness. But there's going to come a time when the Lord is going to lift that. Okay, and it's because of the darkness that they behave in this wicked manner that they do. But once that's lifted and they can see clearly, they're going to be, that's going to be a part of us being that godly and holy people. Verse 19, the meek also shall increase their joy in the Lord Yahweh. So who is the meek? The meek starts with the elect. And that's why it mentions they shall increase their joy in the Lord, right? So they have the joy, but it's going to increase that much more. Similar to what is written in Wisdom of Solomon, the 5th chapter, right? Then shall the righteous man stand in great boldness. So the righteous man is bold, but that boldness is going to be made greater because of the deliverance and the power of the Lord. Now, one more precept that comes to mind on that is, I think it's Wisdom of Solomon. Is it 12? Let's see. Yep, 12 and 17. For when men will not believe that thou art of a full power, thou shewest thy strength, right, the Most High. And among them that know it, thou makest their boldness manifest. So similarly, the elect or the meek are going to increase their joy in the Lord, seeing the things that they were promised and believed coming to pass. And the poor among men shall rejoice in the Holy One of Israel, right, which is Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. For the terrible one is brought to naught, and we know this is also dealing around that same time, because as a result of the terrible one, which primarily the terrible one right now is Esau Edom, as a result of them being brought to naught, being taken out of power and having their kingdom destroyed and being made subject onto us, that is going to lead to the increase in the joy, the increase in the joy of the Lord from the meek. Okay, because that translates or equates to this wicked society going down and the righteous kingdom being set up. For the terrible one is brought to naught, and the scorner is consumed. And how are they going to be consumed? They're going to be consumed with that destruction, that fiery destruction the Lord is going to bring, and all their wicked devices along with it. And all that watch for iniquity are cut off. And so that's all they do today, right? They when you go into the phrase "watch for iniquity," another way of saying that is in NLT, right? Those who plot evil are going to be cut off. So the Lord is going to take them out via judgment. That's going to be a part of the cleansing of the of this wicked world back to a righteous state. That a man that make a man an offender for a word, and lay a snare for him that reproveth in the gate. Now this is also behavior that was shown forth by the rulers, all right, or the judges, or those in high places. Not all of them, but a good majority of them back in ancient Israel. All right, and that's why they came after the prophets. They killed some of them. In fact, Yahushua saying, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets," was because the prophets and those that spoke upright were made offenders for speaking the truth. Had they spoke wickedness and encouraged the people in such matters, they would have been loved and received. But they rebuked them, as it says in the gate, right? And lay a snare for him that reproveth in the gate. The gate will be the openings, right, where you would have a lot of people there. So they would lay a snare or a trap to try and find a way to get the men that would reprove them, right, or speak uprightly, and turn aside the just for a thing of naught, right? So they pervert justice for the thing of naught. Would really be like when you go into the book of, I believe it's Amos, and even Hosea mentioned this, how they would receive bribes and vain things, and in return they would alter judgment. They wouldn't judge righteous judgment. So taking a look at this in the NLT, for example, a similar fate awaits those who use trickery to pervert justice and who tell lies to destroy the innocent. Now, just as they were doing that back then, once again, this also applies to Esau now, because they do this on a much higher level, right? Making a man or an offender for a word. It's to the point now where even an average individual can't even speak something that's common sense. Okay, they can't speak something that's common sense because they would be labeled by, they would be labeled anti-something or toxic or just canceled. That an example is that whole cancel culture, right? They use that to make people label people as like an offender for speaking up for what's right, for reproving them. And today, right, the modern day version of the gate would be whether it's in public or mainly the internet. So oftentimes what you see is Esau set up a system to where now if you speak what's right, but it's against the narrative or it's against what they've popularized as normal, then you're now canceled or there's backlash against you. Okay? And through the system they've set up, they pervert justice for a thing of naught, right? They take away a righteous judgment from those that deserve it, okay? And then they acquit the wicked. One example that also comes to mind is setting up that whole child support system, which in name they make it sound like, oh, this is really needed and beneficial for the child. But if you look at the system, it's really set up against most men. Okay? And that allows women that are wicked to use that and capitalize off of that. Meanwhile, the actual justice should be for the man, but it's set up to benefit her. Okay, so in this time, there's a whole lot of ways, okay, in which via the system that they've set up, they are able to make a man an offender for a word. And ultimately, this applies to us, right, the prophets, in which their demonization that they're setting up is mainly going to be centered around that. For us speaking the truth, what they'll do, similar to what they did with Daniel, is if they know they don't have anything on you and they know that there's really nothing wrong with what you're saying, then they'll create something wrong with what you're saying. Verse 22, therefore thus saith the Lord Yahweh, who redeemed Abraham, concerning the house of Jacob, Jacob shall not now be ashamed. Let's go into the word ashamed. All right. And it says here, to put to shame, to be ashamed, to be disappointed, to be shamed. And usually this would come by way of being abased, right? Suffering judgment. That puts you in a shameful position because now you're in a low position, right? You're either somebody's captive, or you're living a life of poverty, okay, or diseased. It's a shameful position, right? But the Lord is saying now that that's not going to be the case anymore, right? Jacob shall not now be ashamed, neither shall his face now wax pale. And when you actually look into that term of waxing pale, I believe that's an actual idiom, right? If you look up wax pale idiom, it says the idiom wax pale means to become very pale, often in response to sickness, fear, or a shocking event. It implies, like, when you watch certain cartoons, like animated cartoons that were like back in the day, like Tom and Jerry type back in the day, you'll see that kind of they use this waxing pale in some of those scenes. Somebody sees a ghost, like you look like you've seen a ghost. That term, you look like you've seen a ghost, right? Or waxing pale, you'll see somebody get shocked or they see something that is very scary, and then all of a sudden their face turns white, right? Or it just turns like a really, really, really light color because they're afraid, right? It's just not the normal skin color, all right, or appearance that you see. That's what this idiom is in reference for. So when you see that on the screen, in your mind, you know, oh, this person just saw something like really scary, right? Or this person just got like really shook up. That's what that visual represents. So as it says here, it implies a draining of color from one's face. This idiom originates from the Hebrew word kavar, which we can actually look into that, see if that's the one that's used over here, or if they're okay, yeah, all right, they're right. And that because this is a cha, right? And I believe this is actually a war. But as it says, to be white, grow pale, right? Blanch. And now it's going to explain in what sense, right? It says meaning to blanch as with shame. It is notably used in the King James Version of the Bible, such as in Isaiah 29 and 22, as we're reading. Therefore, thus saith the Lord Yahweh, who redeemed Abraham concerning the house of Jacob. Yeah, we just read that. So, like, here's another similar example. While wax pale might be considered somewhat archaic in everyday language, the idea of someone becoming pale due to emotions like fear or shame is still expressed using similar phrases like turning as pale as a ghost or his face went white. So when you go back to Isaiah 29 and 22, as you see, when Isaiah, and this is not just exclusive to Isaiah, but this is one example, oftentimes the same point is reiterated or mentioned in multiple ways. So the first way it's mentioned is that Jacob shall not now be ashamed, right? Neither shall his face wax pale, which would be a result of that shame or fear that now they will not have to experience or suffer anymore. But when he seeth his children, the work of mine hands in the midst of him, they shall sanctify my name and sanctify the Holy One of Jacob, and shall fear the God of Israel. So basically, when they see the condition Israel is going to be in the kingdom, right, you're going to give glory to Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. They also that erred in spirit shall come to understanding, right, which is similar to what was mentioned up above about the deaf, right, verse 18, about the deaf hearing the word and the eyes of the blind being able to see out of that darkness. And they that murmured shall learn doctrine, right? So eventually that's why the scriptures say all Israel shall be saved, right? Because eventually the Lord is going to open up the minds and the eyes of all Israel, which will lead to us being that holy nation, okay, and a separate people unto the Lord. Anyway, that brings us to the end of the book of Isaiah, the 29th chapter. Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Racha Kudash. Until next time, Shalom.